The start of 2020 was marked by the identification of the novel coronavirus in Wuhan, China. Shortly after, on the 15th of January, the police in Sicily arrested 94 people, including alleged mafia members, following a large-scale EU agricultural subsidies fraud. 2 mafia groups were said to have obtained at least 5.5 million euros in EU farm subsidies for land they didn't own. The Dawn raids were said to be one of the largest police operations focused on the Cosa Nostra. The United Kingdom left the European Union at the end of January, raising concerns of its impact on the ability to collaborate with the EU on security issues, including illicit cross-border flows. In February, the Brazilian President Bolsonaro sent a bill to Congress that would open the country's indigenous reserves in the Amazon to commercial mining. Violence against land defenders and indigenous people has become an increasing concern in recent years, especially in Latin America and Asia. At the end of February, US officials negotiated an agreement with the Taliban to end the 18-year war in Afghanistan. Western troops withdrew, and the Taliban escalated their activity to take territorial control. Afghanistan is the world's largest producer of heroin, and the Taliban are known to be involved in this trade by taxing illicit goods in production areas, and further insecurity could boost the opportunities for trafficking groups. In March, the World Health Organization officially declared the COVID-19 outbreak as a pandemic.
Use the word pandemic.
Illicit actors took advantage of new opportunities afforded by the pandemic, including the sale of fake PPE by creating fraudulent websites and the hacking of furlough schemes. 1 week later, oil prices fell to a 17-year low, largely due to a decline in demand from industries stalling as a result of the pandemic. And in April, US crude oil fell below zero for the first time in history, following a global economic slump. This had a knock-on effect on organized crime, as there was less financial incentive for criminal actors to engage with the oil industry. But instead of reducing crime, this is likely to have motivated them to find other sources of illicit income. The collapse in oil also brought about a boom in floating oil storage, leaving many ships carrying oil cargo vulnerable to piracy. In May, China launched the first of several incursions into the Indian territory of Ladakh. Border disputes inevitably affect cross-border trade, both formal and informal. From May 2020, George Floyd's murder sent a tidal wave of protests across the US and beyond, sparking a crucial debate on the issues of race, inequality, and the relationship between law enforcement and marginalized communities. On the 5th of June, Brazil's Supreme Court announced a ban on police raids in Rio de Janeiro's favelas. Deadly police incursions into Brazil's favelas were not a new phenomenon, and the move came after the police killings increased significantly in the first 4 months of 2020 in Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. These broader societal issues provide a lens through which to examine responses to organized crime, particularly in places where there is a disconnect between police and citizens. Later that month, the UN published a report calling for an investigation into abuses committed in the context of President of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs. Since Duterte came into power in 2016, it's estimated that 27,000 people have been killed in anti-drug operations. At the start of July, European law enforcement agencies announced the dismantling of EncroChat, an encrypted messaging service used by criminals. It resulted in 800 initial arrests and the seizures of substantial volumes of cash, drugs, and weapons. In August, a devastating explosion in Lebanon destroyed the port of Beirut, killing 217 people and displacing over 300,000. It prompted major anti-government protests. Investigations that followed showed that the explosion was not only a result of inadequate control measures, but also a toxic mix of opaque offshore structures, impunity, and troublesome sectarian politics. A few months after the dismantling of EncroChat, documents revealing the astronomical sums of money laundered in the global financial system were leaked. The so-called FinCEN files. It shone a light on the use of international banking systems by oligarchs and criminals across the globe. And the next day, the Trump administration imposed economic sanctions on Iran following the US withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal. With these sanctions, long-standing smuggling networks can benefit from the increased need for basic goods and other commodities that are either too expensive or cannot be legally obtained. On the 4th of November, the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered a military offensive against regional forces in Tigray. Across Africa, conflict and instability were unimpeded by the pandemic, with armed attacks, government offensives, and insurgencies, and creating opportunities for arms and people trafficking in the region. On the 2nd of December, the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs voted to remove cannabis from Schedule 4 of the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. While the move is unlikely to have any material impact on illicit markets, it does represent a shift in attitudes towards the substance, paving the way for further reform. And on the 6th of December, President Nicolas Maduro's party won legislative elections in Venezuela, which were boycotted by all main opposition parties. The country has become a key hub for illicit flows of arms and people, and while the political crisis shows no sign of abating, the country's instability is a key enabler of organized criminal activity, not only in Venezuela itself, but it also risks destabilizing other fragile states in Latin America and the Caribbean.
These events are, of course, by no means an exhaustive list, but they are illustrative of the way that the illicit economy is interwoven with key geopolitical events of the year. You can take a look at the full timeline in the 2021 Global Initiative Index report. All over the world, organized crime poses a major security threat, and this is made even more fragile by a lack of resilience to organized crime. Illicit economies and criminal actors are a transnational threat, which demand a global response. Countries must work together to help prevent and slow the damage caused by the illicit economy and criminal actors. The Global Organized Crime Index aims to improve our understanding of how this could be achieved. Focusing on criminality alone limits our view of the organized crime landscape. Countries may have similar scores for criminality, but it's how they approach this problem that matters the most. By also considering how robust a country's framework and capacity is to respond, the index takes a much more rounded and balanced view. And while the precise relationship between criminality and resilience cannot yet be seen, we hope that with subsequent iterations, the index will allow us to better understand these dynamics over time and be used as the tool to galvanize political will and increase global awareness of the threat. Without these elements, we cannot hope to have an impact against a problem this vast. Now let's have a look at some of the key findings from the index in 2020.
More than 3/4 of the world's population live in countries with high levels of criminality and countries with low levels of resilience to organized crime. 79.2% of the world's population live in countries with high levels of criminality, and 79.4% of the world's population live in countries with low levels of resilience. This doesn't mean that a large population size is a determining factor of criminality. It is a matter of how many people are impacted by organized crime. It underscores the ubiquity of organized crime and the urgent need to implement measures to combat it.